I'm Margaret Hodge, 76 years old, and I'd lived in the same house for 42 years, until the day I locked the door for the last time. The autumn wind was cold that morning, and the cab driver had to wait while I wiped my eyes in the driveway. I had packed everything I could into 2 suitcases and gave away the rest. At my age, you don't just downsize your home, you sort through a lifetime and decide what's worth remembering. The nursing home I chose was called Golden Haven, a place that promised quiet routines and polite care. But it was nothing like the life I had known with Rex in our old blue-shuttered house by the bay. I'd been there for almost 4 years when the letter arrived from a sister I hadn't spoken to in 2 decades before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever felt like you were slowly disappearing in your own family. I was raised in Pennsylvania in a house where you never raised your voice, unless the barn was on fire. My father worked the rail yard till his back gave out, and my mother ran a sewing business from the kitchen table every Sunday after church. She'd hand us a slice of pie with one hand and correct our posture with the other. My sister, Alice, and I were close. In the early years, she was older by 4 years and always quicker to speak up. But I was the one who lingered after dinner to do the dishes without being asked. When we were young, we'd walk to the drugstore together to buy licorice and postcards and swear we'd never grow apart. We grew apart. It happened after our parents passed, and the will came with it. There were things said between us about who deserved what, about who did more and who only showed up when it counted. In the end, Alice got the house, and I got the cold shoulder. 20 years passed without so much as a Christmas card. I told myself it didn't matter. But there were nights when I'd see 2 girls in a black and white photo on my dresser and wonder how we'd gotten so far from there. Rex passed before his time. Pancreatic cancer that moved faster than any of us expected. I held his hand through the hospice nights and buried him with his favorite pen in his jacket pocket. The house felt too quiet. After that, too full of echoes. So after a few years, I sold it. Orson, my son, offered to let me move in with him and his wife Gabrielle in the suburbs, but something in her smile held back, and so I declined. Instead, I chose Golden Haven, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't anyone else's burden the first year. Orson visited every weekend. He'd bring my favorite chocolates, the kind with coconut in the center, and talk about his new car or his company's growth. By the second year, it was once a month, sometimes less. He still called, but the calls got shorter. Mother's Day was a card delivered by courier. Christmas was a video message with poor lighting and an apology for not being able to stop by. I told myself this was just how life worked, that children grow busy and mothers grow old. One Wednesday morning, I got a knock on the door from Paul, the receptionist. "There's a woman here to see you," he said. Her name's Jennifer Walsh, lawyer from a firm in Wilmington. The name sounded vaguely familiar, and when I entered the visitor's lounge, she stood and handed me a letter from Alice. Alice, who was now gone. Lung cancer took her quickly, according to Jennifer. But she left me something, not just words, but $300,000 in cash, and a note that said she didn't want to die without setting things right. I sat with that letter for a long time. Her handwriting, still the same as when she used to label our school notebooks. She said the money was her way of saying sorry for the time we lost, that she spent her life saving for a future that never came and didn't want me to do the same. I didn't know what to feel, except that for the first time in a long time, something in my chest let go, like a window had opened in a room that had been sealed too long. I didn't call Orson to tell him about the inheritance. Instead, I packed my things carefully and booked a cab to his house. Just a visit, I told myself. Just a surprise, but what waited for me on the other side of that door would make me question whether I was ever more than an obligation to my only child. Orson opened the door before I had the chance to knock. He smiled like he hadn't forgotten how called me Mom and pulled me into a hug that felt just a little too tight, a little too rehearsed. "You should have called," he said. "I would have picked you up at the airport." I gave him a soft smile. "And missed the joy of surprising you." I followed him through the doorway, wheeling the old blue suitcase behind me. It had a bit of a wobble now, and I noticed him glance at it as he picked it up. "What did you pack, Bricks?" he joked. I laughed politely. At my age, everything weighs more than it used to shoes medicine books. Inside, the air smelled faintly of something floral, something expensive. Gabrielle appeared from down the hall, wearing a tailored dress in a pale shade I couldn't name, and heels that didn't seem fit for a Tuesday morning. She kissed my cheek lightly, barely touching me. "What a pleasant surprise, Bree. If we'd known, we would have had your room ready." I returned the gesture, noting how carefully she kept her smile fixed in place. "I hope I'm not too much of an inconvenience." "Oh, don't be silly," she said. "Your family." Orson led me upstairs to a guest room that looked like it had never been slept in. The bed was made with sharp corners. The walls were pale and bare. There were no photos, no books, nothing personal, just a room waiting for someone who wouldn't stay long. "We gave you the room with the garden view," he said, setting my suitcase down beside the bed. "It's Gabrielle's favorite." I nodded and thanked him, waiting until the door closed to sit at the edge of the bed and take a breath. My knees ached from the flight, but the stiffness in my chest had nothing to do with arthritis. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt staged. I stood by the window, looking out over the yard, neatly trimmed, no weeds in sight, a fountain humming near the back fence. It didn't look lived in. It looked photographed. I unpacked just enough to freshen up, then changed into the navy dress Rex used to call my battle dress, the one I wore when I needed to feel composed. We sat down for dinner an hour later at a table big enough for 10, though only 3 seats were set. Gabrielle laid out containers from a restaurant Italian, she said, as if it mattered. I thanked her and complimented the spread. "You're too kind," she said, finally looking at me. There was a softness to her tone now, but her eyes stayed guarded. Orson brought out a bottle of wine. "Red or white, Mom?" "Red, just a splash." "Heart healthy," he said as he poured. "That's what Dad always said." I smiled at the memory. Your father had strong opinions about most things. We passed plates and offered polite conversation, weather, traffic, small talk. Orson asked how things were at the home, and I gave a practiced answer. "Same as always. I keep busy. Started a little chess club. Helps keep the mind sharp." Gabrielle nodded like she was listening, though she barely touched her food. "Sounds peaceful," she said. "Routine can be a comfort." "Routine can be a lot of things," I replied. "Comfort isn't always one of them." The table quieted for a moment, and I filled it with stories, funny ones from Orson's childhood. I told them about the time he tried to bathe the neighbor's cat, how he once wore pajama pants under his snow pants to school, how he used to hide his vegetables in napkins. Orson flushed with embarrassment, but he laughed too, and for a little while the mood lifted. Even Gabrielle cracked a smile and asked questions. For those few moments, it almost felt like we were a family again. After dinner, they insisted I rest while they cleaned up. I didn't argue. The stairs were hard on my knees, and the couch in the living room looked inviting enough. I sat flipping through a magazine I didn't care about, watching the clock tick toward bedtime. Then I heard it muffled voices from the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls weren't thick, and Gabrielle's voice carried more than she thought it did. "Couldn't you have warned me?" she said. "I was supposed to meet Megan tomorrow. Now I'll have to cancel." "She's my mother," Orson said quieter. "What was I supposed to do, turn her away?" "Of course not," she replied. "But she could have called. We could have been prepared. It's only a few days." Orson sounded tired. "She never stays long." Gabrielle lowered her voice then. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught one that stopped my breath. "The bank called." They came into the living room a few minutes later with dessert tiramisu in glass dishes and fresh coffee. "Hope you like tiramisu," Gabrielle said, smiling sweetly. "It's the house special." I smiled back, said it looked wonderful. I didn't mention I'd never had it before. The rest of the night went smoothly enough. Orson shared that he'd received a promotion at work. Gabrielle talked about a charity she was involved in. They asked about my crossword club about the weather in South Bethany. It was all practiced gentle distant. By 10, I claimed exhaustion and went upstairs. I checked the suitcase before bed, though I wasn't sure why. The money was still there, hidden in the compartment Rex had installed years ago when we traveled abroad. Just in case, he used to say. A backup plan. That night, I left the light on. The room was too quiet. I could hear Gabrielle on the phone through the wall. "Third time this week," she whispered. "I told them we'll pay next month." A pause. "No, don't tell Orson. He's already on edge." She kept talking lower and faster, and I stopped listening. The meaning was already clear. Their house wasn't just a little over budget. They were in serious trouble. The next morning, Gabrielle made breakfast like nothing had happened. Waffles, berries, yogurt. She smiled like we were old friends. "I've got a client meeting," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "Is it okay if I leave you two alone?" "Of course," I said. "Orson and I will keep each other company." Orson offered to take the morning off, but I waved it off. "You've got work. I'll rest." He disappeared into his office, and I wandered through the house. The rooms were polished, the shelves full of decorative books, not a fingerprint in sight. But the deeper I looked, the more I saw the cracks, the bills on Gabrielle's desk, the second notices from the bank, the unopened envelopes from credit agencies. At lunch, Orson came down looking drained. "Work's been crazy," he said. "New project, tighter deadlines." I made sandwiches, listened to him talk, and asked about Gabrielle's business. "Interior design," he said, trying to smile. "She's got great taste. Always has." "Must take a lot to start something like that." He shrugged. "It's an investment." I nodded. "By the way, do you know the nearest bank branch I might need to stop by tomorrow?" He paused. "Why do you need the bank?" "Just something with my account," I said lightly. "Nothing urgent." He nodded a little too quickly. "I can drive you if you want." "No need," I said. "I'll take a cab. I don't want to pull you from your work." He returned to his office, and I returned to my thoughts. That night, I overheard them again. Their voices were low but urgent. Gabrielle sounded strained. "One more missed payment and they'll start foreclosure." Orson sounded defeated. "I'm trying." She kept pushing. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. "Your mother's hiding something." Her sudden visit, the questions about the bank. "She's carrying that suitcase everywhere." I stood on the other side of the door, holding my breath. Orson tried to push back, but she didn't stop. "We need to know what she's got. Ask her. If she won't tell you, then we think about next steps. The state can take care of her. It'd save thousands." And Orson? He didn't yell. He didn't say no. He said, "Okay." I returned to my room in silence, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I sat on the bed and listened to the quiet creak of the house as it settled for the night. They didn't know what I had heard, but I did. And I knew I couldn't stay here another day. I sat on the edge of the bed with the suitcase by my feet and the hallway quiet behind me. The money was still inside, sealed and untouched in the false bottom Rex had built years ago when we took that trip to Florence. Just in case, he'd said. Always good to have a backup plan. I opened it now just to be sure. Neat stacks all there. $300,000 that could have been a gift. Instead, it had become a lifeline. I didn't cry. Not then. I was past that. Instead, I moved with quiet, careful purpose. I changed out of the dress and into the pants and sweater I'd packed for the ride home. I slipped my travel shoes on, soft-soled and familiar. Everything I needed was already folded in the suitcase: my papers, my pills, even the old train ticket I'd kept just in case this went badly. It had gone worse than badly. I didn't leave a note. I thought about it, stood there with a pen in my hand, but anything I wrote would be twisted. Better to leave them nothing. No words to argue with, no explanations to unravel. The house was still. No light under the doors. The hallway smelled faintly of perfume and warm dust. I stepped lightly, one hand on the railing, as I made my way down the stairs, each creak of the floorboard loud in my ears. I unlocked the front door slowly and stepped out into the cold. The wind cut across the lawn, and I pulled my scarf tighter. The cab I'd called on the app would be there in a few minutes. Orson never changed the security code, it was still his birthday. I tapped it in and reset the alarm just like he'd shown me on the first night. I waited under the oak tree by the driveway. The same tree I remembered helping Orson plant the summer he turned 12. It had grown tall, its branches now bare in the November dark. I didn't look back at the house. The cab pulled up right on time. The driver was young, polite, didn't ask questions. He loaded my suitcase into the trunk and nodded when I told him where I was going. The roads were empty. The city rolled past in quiet patches of yellow streetlight and unlit porches. I watched it all, hands folded in my lap, my reflection faint in the window. At the bus station, I bought a one-way ticket to South Bethany. The clerk didn't look up from her screen. I found a seat at the far end of the waiting area and kept the suitcase in front of me, one hand on the handle. Orson had called 3 times already. I turned off my phone. He would figure out I was gone soon enough. I sat there for over an hour, the lights flickering overhead, the buzz of a vending machine humming beside me. 2 travelers dozed on benches near the exit. A janitor mopped without hurry. The quiet of it all sank into my bones. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices again. Orson's pause before agreeing Gabrielle's words, sharp as glass. I thought of the holidays I'd spent alone in Golden Haven, the polite cards, the missed calls, the shrinking attention. The way I'd talked myself into believing they were just busy. Now I knew better. When the bus finally pulled up, the few of us waiting filed on without a word. I chose a seat at the back, set the suitcase beside me, and pulled my coat around my shoulders. The lights dimmed. The driver said something over the intercom that I didn't catch, and we pulled out into the night. We passed a diner I remembered from years ago. Rex and I had stopped there once for pie and coffee. Back when we used to take road trips just to get out of the house. The lights were still on inside. A man in a uniform sat at the counter stirring sugar into a mug. The sight of it made something in me ache. The hum of the bus and the rhythm of the road should have been enough to lull me to sleep, but my thoughts circled back to Orson. I remembered the fever he had when he was 9, how I sat up all night with cold washcloths counting his breaths. I remembered the way he used to look up at me when he scraped his knees, trusting I could fix anything. I remembered standing at his graduation proud, hopeful. I'd built my life around him, and now he wanted to hand me over to the state. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the bus stopped for a break. I stayed on board. I didn't want to leave the suitcase unattended. The man across from me slept with his mouth open, the brim of his cap pulled low. A woman 3 rows up spoke softly into her phone, her words blurred by the noise of the heater. Back on the road, I finally dozed off. I dreamed of Rex. He was sitting on the porch with his crossword and a mug of coffee, the breeze stirring the pages of the newspaper. I sat beside him, and for a moment, everything was still. Then the dream shifted. Orson was there, but younger, standing in the hallway with his school bag asking why I was leaving. I reached for him, but he turned, and when he looked back, he wasn't a boy anymore. His face had changed, hardened. The eyes were the same, but the rest I didn't recognize. I woke with the first light of morning. The sky was pale gray, the streets of South Bethany just beginning to stir. We pulled into the bus station, a low red brick building with a row of flower planters out front, the soil bare now for winter. Lynette was waiting on the sidewalk, wrapped in her coat, her silver hair pulled into a bun. She waved when she saw me and walked quickly to the door. "You look like you've been through a war," she said as she hugged me. "Come on, let's get you home." Her car was the same old Volvo I remembered with the heater that took forever to kick in. She didn't ask questions, just helped with my suitcase, waited until we were on the road to speak again. "Your son called," she said gently. "Left a message asking if I'd seen you." I told him the truth that I hadn't. She glanced over at me. "I figured if you wanted him to know where you were, you'd tell him yourself." I nodded, too tired to say much. The road ahead was lined with bare trees and the occasional flicker of Christmas lights. Her cottage sat at the edge of town, white shutters, and a garden that would bloom again in spring. It was exactly as I remembered it. She opened the door and stepped aside. "Welcome home, Bree." I stepped inside, the smell of cinnamon and coffee settling around me. The warmth of the room wrapped itself around my shoulders. For the first time in days, I let my guard down. We had breakfast at the kitchen table, scrambled eggs, toast, hot tea. I didn't tell her everything right away, but I knew I would. Lynette's kitchen smelled like buttered toast and cinnamon tea. We sat at her old oak table with mismatched mugs and cloth napkins she probably sewed herself years ago. The sun had just cleared the edge of her garden, casting a golden strip across the floor. She didn't ask anything right away. She just handed me the mug and said, "You sit, I'll get the eggs started." We ate quietly for a while. I'd barely touched my toast when she finally looked up and said, "You want to talk about it?" I nodded, but I didn't start right away. It took me a few sips of tea and a long look out the window at her frost-dusted flower beds before I could say what needed saying. I told her everything from the letter and the inheritance to the night I slipped out of Orson's house while they were upstairs plotting what to do with me. I told her what I'd overheard, how Gabrielle spoke like I was just a problem to be solved, a bill to be redirected, and how Orson, my son, hadn't stopped her. Lynette didn't interrupt. She sat there with both hands wrapped around her cup, her brows drawn in a way that told me she was listening to every word. When I finished, she set her cup down and said, "You're staying here until you decide your next move. No rush. The guest room's made up, and I'm not letting you go anywhere near that nursing home until you've had proper rest and some good meals." I wanted to thank her, but the lump in my throat made it hard. She gave my hand a gentle pat and stood to clear the plates. By the third day, I finally stopped listening for footsteps in the hallway, stopped checking my phone for missed calls. Lynette kept things light, reading headlines from the paper pointing out the birds that came to her feeder, leaving crossword puzzles folded on my nightstand like a small invitation back to myself. That afternoon, while folding laundry together, she said, "You're not going back to Golden Haven, are you?" "I can't," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." She nodded. "Then let's figure out what comes next." The following morning, Lynette called in reinforcements, two of our oldest friends from back in the day. Susan Meyer showed up, first, cheeks pink from the cold, a basket of muffins in one arm. She had once lived down the hall from me at Golden Haven before moving in with her daughter. Still wore bold lipstick and long earrings like someone who refused to disappear quietly. Then came Edie Britt, sharp-eyed and quick-tongued, my old teaching colleague from the high school. We'd weathered budget cuts and fire drills together, and I knew if anyone would speak plainly, it was Edie. Lynette set the kettle on the stove and passed out mugs, and just like that, we had a council. 4 women in their 70s sitting around a sunlit table, putting our heads together the way we used to over parent-teacher meetings and neighborhood fundraisers. Susan was the first to speak. "You need to get somewhere safe, somewhere Orson and that wife of his can't touch you." "I second that," Edie added. "And you should sue the pants off them. Financial abuse of an elder. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." "Let's not start with lawsuits," Lynette said gently. "What Bree needs is a plan. Safety. Space to breathe." I told them I had the inheritance still in cash, tucked safely in a locked case under the guest bed. Their eyes widened, but no one said anything for a moment. Finally, Susan leaned forward. "I know someone at Seaside Gardens, private place out near the coast, newer than Golden Haven. Ocean views, top-tier staff." "You'd love it. I've seen it," I said. "Passed it a few times on drives with Rex. Looked beautiful, but I figured it cost a fortune." Edie waved her hand. "You have a fortune. That money was meant for your freedom, not for bailouts." We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting options, jotting down names and numbers, reviewing pros and cons the way we used to for school projects. By evening, we'd formed a plan. I'd visit Seaside Gardens the next day. If I liked what I saw, I'd move in before the end of the week, pay a year's rent in advance, split the inheritance across secure accounts, and keep a small emergency fund on hand, just in case. The next morning, Susan called her contact and got me a tour with the head of intake by noon. Lynette came with me holding my arm as we walked through the front entrance. The air smelled like lavender and salt. The lobby had high windows and soft music playing low in the background. A young woman named Victoria greeted us with a smile that actually reached her eyes. She gave us the full tour: private suites, a chef-run restaurant, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a winter garden filled with orchids. "You can bring your own furniture if you'd like," she said, as we toured one of the ocean view rooms. "We want each space to feel like home." I stood at the window and looked out at the wide gray-blue water. The waves rolled gently across the sand seagulls hovering above the tide line. It didn't feel like a facility. It felt like a new beginning. That afternoon, I signed the papers. A single sweet year paid up front. Lynette stood beside me the whole time. When we got back to her house, Susan and Edie were waiting with soup on the stove and an update. "Orson's in town," Susan said. "Went to Golden Haven asking about you. Then the police station. Tried to file a missing persons report." "What did they tell him?" I asked. Edie smiled just slightly. "They told him a capable adult has the right to go where she pleases, and they already had a letter on file from you saying you'd gone on vacation and would contact family when ready." I blinked. "A letter? Typed it up myself," Edie said. "Copied your handwriting from an old Christmas card. Not perfect, but convincing enough." I wasn't sure whether to be horrified or grateful. But the truth was, I felt something I hadn't in a long time protected. That week was a blur of small logistics, moving and decorating, setting up new accounts. When the time came to leave Lynette's cottage, I stood on her front steps with my suitcase and hugged her longer than I meant to. "You saved me," I said. "You and the others." She smiled softly. "You're just coming back to yourself, that's all." My new apartment at Seaside Gardens had soft carpet, a firm bed, and a reading chair by the window. I placed a photo of Rex on the nightstand, set a plant by the windowsill, hung a framed quilt square from my teaching days above the desk. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Orson. I let it ring once, then I answered. I answered the phone and heard Orson's voice before I could say hello. "Mom," he said like he'd been holding his breath. "Thank God." "Where are you?" "I've been calling everyone. I went to the police. They said you left on your own, but I didn't know if you were safe." "I'm safe," I said, steady but calm. "And I know Orson. I heard everything." There was a pause, just air on the other end of the line like he was trying to decide how to respond. "What do you mean?" he asked, but he didn't sound confused. He sounded cautious. "I mean the conversation you had with Gabrielle," I said. "About my money. About sending me to a state-run home. About how long I might have left." More silence. Then a shift in his voice, smaller, more careful. "Mom, I can explain. There's no need," I said. "I heard enough. That's why I left." "Gabby was upset," he said quickly. "We were under pressure, and she said things she didn't mean. I was just trying to calm her down." "But you agreed with her." "Orson," I said. "You said, okay. I heard it. You promised to talk to me about the money." His voice cracked. "I didn't know what else to do. We're drowning in debt. Gabrielle's business is failing. We were desperate. But I would never go through with anything that would hurt you. It's already done," I said quietly. "The trust is broken." He didn't argue. Not right away. Just said, "Can we meet, please? Just talk." I agreed to meet him 2 days later at a cafe near the waterfront, public bright open. Lynette and Edie came with me not because I asked, but because I think we all knew I shouldn't face him alone. The cafe had a row of windows that looked out over the harbor where the fishing boats were still moored for the season. It was nearly noon. Orson arrived right on time. He looked thinner than I remembered, gaunt, almost with circles under his eyes, and a coat that looked like he'd slept in it. He walked up to the table and tried to hug me. I let him, but just barely. It felt like shaking hands with a memory. "I'm so glad to see you," he said, his voice low. "Can we maybe talk in private?" "No," I said, motioning to the seat across from me. "This is fine." He nodded and sat down, glanced at Lynette and Edie, then folded his hands on the table like a schoolboy waiting for a scolding. "I know how it sounded," he said, but Gabrielle was venting. "We just gotten another notice from the bank. She didn't mean those things." "And you?" I asked. "Did you mean them?" He shook his head. "I didn't know what else to do. I panicked." She kept pushing. We were behind on the mortgage, the car, everything. I said, "Okay, but I didn't mean it. I swear." Edie raised an eyebrow. "That's convenient," she said. "I never would have acted on it." Orson insisted. "It was just talk." "But you agreed with her." "Orson," I said, "you didn't stop her. You didn't defend me. You were willing to try and get me to hand over my savings." "I didn't know about any inheritance," he said, looking genuinely surprised. "That came from Aunt Alice." I nodded. "She left it to me in cash before she died." His expression shifted like he was trying not to let the number matter. "How much?" "That's not your concern," Lynette said, cutting in. He held up his hands. "I'm not asking for money. I didn't know. That's all." "You never asked," I said. "Not once in the last few years. Not about my life, my health. I became a name on a calendar to you. A call on Mother's Day, a check mark." His eyes filled, but he didn't reach for my hand again. "I know. I failed you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just don't want to lose you completely." "I've moved," I said, "to Seaside Gardens. It's safe, it's private, and it's mine." He nodded slowly. "That's good. I'm glad you found a place that makes you feel secure. And I'm not giving you any money," I added. "Not now, not ever." He didn't argue, just nodded again. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said after a moment. "But things will be different. No visits without calling first. No talk of finances. And I will not see Gabrielle again." He nodded a third time. "I understand." When it was time to leave, he stood and offered his hand. I gave him a brief hug, light as a breath. Then he walked back down the sidewalk alone. His coat tugged tight against the wind. The weeks that followed passed gently. Seaside Gardens was quiet, well-run. I decorated my suite with family photos and a quilt Rex's mother had made when Orson was born. I joined a book club run by a retired professor named Carlos. I met Mary, whose husband had been an admiral and who had more stories than time. I took up gentle exercise in the morning and played cards on the terrace with Edie and Susan on Sundays. Orson called once a week. The conversations were brief, polite. We didn't talk about the past, or money, or Gabrielle. Just the weather, his job, how I was settling in. Then one afternoon, my phone rang again. Orson. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was unsteady. Gabrielle left me, he said. Took what little savings we had. I don't know what to do. I don't want money, Mom. I'm thinking of moving. South Bethany, maybe? Closer to you. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at the ocean, the waves gentle and endless. I'll think about it, I said. Call me in a week. Thank you, he said. And Mom, I'm sorry. I ended the call and sat there a while listening to the soft sound of the waves and the faint laughter from the hallway. The following Saturday, I took the bus into town and met Lynette at the library steps. She had a manila folder tucked under her arm and that brisk, determined look she always wore when she was on a mission. We didn't speak much on the walk over, just enough to keep pace, our coats pulled tight against the wind. She led me through the back door of the courthouse annex, where she'd worked for years as a notary before retiring. Inside the building was warm and still with high ceilings and the kind of polished wooden trim you didn't see much anymore. Lynette signed us in at the clerk's office, then walked us up to a small private conference room on the second floor. The woman waiting there stood when we entered. Mrs. Halbrook, she said, offering her hand. I'm Margaret Keller, estate and elder law specialist. Lynette gave me the background, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. I nodded, set my purse down, and took a seat across from her. I told her everything what I'd overheard, how I'd left the inheritance and Orson's phone calls. I kept my voice even clear. Just facts, no embellishment. She took notes and listened without interruption. When I finished, she looked at me with calm eyes and said, You've taken every right step so far, but if you want protection, long-term protection, you'll need to put it in writing. She outlined the plan, 2 new trusts, one revocable, one irrevocable, both naming me as primary and sole beneficiary. A durable power of attorney assigned to a neutral third party, a medical directive that removed Orson from any decision-making role, a sealed living will, and a formal statement of intent explaining that any previous verbal agreements were null. It's a lot of paperwork, she said, but once it's done, they won't be able to touch a penny of your money. Not through probate, not through guardianship court, not even if they try to prove diminished capacity. You're still sharp, Mrs. Halbrook. That's your greatest asset right now. I signed everything by late afternoon. When I left the courthouse, I carried the copies in a flat leather case Lynette had dug out of her attic. It used to belong to her husband. She said it seemed fitting now. Over the next few weeks, I slept better. I no longer kept the suitcase under the bed or checked my account balances 3 times a day. I started attending weekly art classes at the residence center. Nothing fancy, just watercolors and acrylics. I painted the coastline once, then Rex's old boots. My hands still remembered the movements, and something about the quiet, repetitive strokes gave me peace. Then in the middle of February, Orson showed up in person. It was early evening. The sun had already dropped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the common room. I was playing cards with Edie and a woman named Marion when one of the aides walked in holding a clipboard. Mrs. Halbrook, she said gently, there's a visitor for you. Says he's your son. Should I tell him you're unavailable? I set my cards down. I'll speak with him, but out front. Just 5 minutes. He was waiting by the fountain near the entryway, wearing that same gray coat from before. He looked thinner still, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. His hands were in his pockets, and when he saw me, his shoulders sagged with relief. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Thanks for seeing me." I stood a few feet away. "You didn't call." "I didn't think you'd answer," he said. "And I didn't come to ask for money. I wanted to talk." We sat on the bench near the fountain. He kept glancing at the building like he couldn't believe I lived there. "This place is beautiful," he said. "I can't believe I didn't know it existed." I didn't reply. I let the silence settle. "I've been living with a friend," he said, "just until I figure things out. Gabrielle left me in a mess, took my name off the accounts. I didn't see it coming." "That's between you and her," I said softly. He nodded. "I know. I just thought maybe we could start over. You and I." He nodded again. "I miss you." I looked at him, really looked, and I saw the boy I raised and the man he became and the gap between the two. "Orson, I've taken steps to protect myself. Legal steps. You're no longer part of my financial or medical decisions, and I've made peace with that." I'm not trying to undo anything he said quickly. "I just want to be in your life, even if it's just once in a while. Maybe lunch now and then." I studied his face. He didn't look like a man playing a part. He looked tired, humbled. "We can try," I said, "but slowly. And only if you understand there's no going back to the way things were. This is a new arrangement." He looked down, nodded. "That's fair." We sat there a little longer. A breeze picked up, and I pulled my coat tighter. Then he stood. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll call before I come next time." "Please do," I said. He walked back toward his car, parked just beyond the main entrance. I stood until he drove off. That night, I called Lynette and told her everything. She listened, then said, "You did the right thing. You gave him a boundary and a path. Now it's up to him." The next week passed quietly. I added more plants to my window ledge. I helped Carlos organize a reading list for the spring book club. I wrote a letter to an old friend in Oregon. Then just before bed one evening, I checked the mailbox near the front desk. Inside was a formal envelope, embossed, no return address. I opened it in my room under the lamplight. Inside was a single-page notice from a law office in Charleston. Petition for emergency conservatorship, filed by Orson Halbrook. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I read it twice before sitting down at the edge of my bed. Conservatorship, emergency. Orson had gone to court claiming I was no longer mentally competent to manage my affairs, that I was at risk of exploitation, that I had recently shown erratic behavior. The language was formal, but pointed each phrase laced with a quiet insult. He'd filed it under the pretense of protection. But I knew better. I picked up the phone and called Lynette. She answered on the first ring. "He filed," I said. There was a pause, then her voice turned sharp. "He would I read the top lines aloud, then the hearing date scheduled for the following Thursday." "I'll call Margaret," she said. "First thing in the morning. Don't worry, Bree. He doesn't have a case." I hung up, placed the letter back in its envelope, and set it on the nightstand beside Rex's photo. Then I turned off the light and lay awake for hours watching the ceiling. By morning, Margaret had already called the courthouse and secured a full copy of the petition. She came to Seaside Gardens with a copy under her arm and a list of countermeasures. "He claims you've been isolated, confused, giving large sums of money to strangers," she said, sliding the papers across my coffee table. "He's painting a picture of decline. But we have your cognitive assessment, the trust documents, and the financial log you've been keeping." I opened the folder. My own handwriting stared back at me, columns of expenses, dates, names. I hadn't realized how thorough I'd been, just keeping records to feel in control. Margaret looked at me over the top of her glasses. You've done more to protect yourself than most people your age. You're not just competent, you're organized. They won't get anywhere with this. Edie and Susan came that evening. Susan brought 2 peach hand pies wrapped in wax paper. Edie brought a notepad and a ballpoint pen already uncapped. You ready to take the stand? Edie asked. I smiled faintly. Do I have to? You may not have to, Margaret had said. But if the judge asks, you'll be prepared. Just speak plainly. You've got the truth. That's more than enough. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in the small lounge off the main corridor, watching the moonlight dance across the tile. I thought of Rex, how he used to say, the truth is quiet. That's how you know it's real. I arrived at the courthouse just before 10. Margaret walked beside me, calm and composed. Lynette was already waiting inside. The courtroom was small, just 2 rows of benches, a wooden railing, and the judge's bench at the far end. Orson sat on the left with a young attorney who looked barely 30. He glanced back when I walked in, then quickly looked away. The judge was a middle-aged woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense tone. She reviewed the initial petition aloud, then turned to Margaret. Counselor, I see you've filed a motion to dismiss, yes, Your Honor, Margaret replied, on grounds of insufficient evidence and violation of due process. Orson's attorney stood. We have reason to believe that Mrs. Halbrook is vulnerable to financial exploitation. My client is acting solely out of concern for his mother's welfare. The judge nodded. I'll need to hear from both parties. Margaret gestured for me to take the stand. My hands were steady as I placed them on the rail. Mrs. Halbrook, the judge said, can you tell the court in your own words why you believe this petition is inappropriate? I cleared my throat and began. I am 78 years old. I've lived independently since my husband passed 7 years ago. I recently received a private inheritance from my late sister-in-law, which I've used to relocate and secure long-term housing. I've taken legal steps to protect my assets and my healthcare wishes. I have no debts, no outstanding obligations, and no signs of cognitive decline. I have friends, a support system, and full capacity to manage my own affairs. I paused, met the judge's eyes. My son did not file this petition out of concern. He filed it because I refused to give him money. Orson shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Margaret submitted a folder of documents, medical evaluations, financial logs, copies of the trust, even statements from my neighbors at Seaside Gardens confirming my daily activities and community engagement. The judge flipped through the files slowly, her brow creased in thought. After a long pause, she set the papers down and looked toward Orson's table. Mr. Halbrook, have you witnessed any actual signs of mental decline? No, he said, almost too quickly. But she disappeared. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She cut off communication. She was entitled to, the judge said. She's an adult. The room was silent. After reviewing everything, the judge folded her hands. This court finds no evidence of incapacity or undue influence. The petition is denied and will be permanently sealed to protect the respondent's privacy. She turned toward me. Mrs. Halbrook, you are free to continue managing your affairs as you see fit. Is there anything further you'd like to request? I took a breath. Just one. I'd like a restraining order prohibiting further legal contact without mediation present. Margaret nodded, then submitted the request. The judge approved it without hesitation. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. I pulled my scarf tighter and exhaled. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in weeks. Lynette caught my arm. You were brilliant in there. I was tired, I said, but I wasn't afraid. Orson came down the steps behind us. Mommy called. I turned, but didn't move toward him. I didn't want it to go this far, he said. I thought, maybe you'd need help. If something ever happened, then you should have asked, I said, instead of taking me to court. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He just nodded and walked away. We drove back in silence. Lynette kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near mine. That evening, I sat by my window and watched the ocean, thinking of how quickly things can change. How a son can become a stranger. How strangers can become a shield. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there in the soft glow of the lamp, knowing something had shifted for good. The morning after the hearing, I woke to the soft hush of rain against the window pane. The storm had moved in overnight. Nothing fierce, just steady and thoughtful, the kind of weather that invites stillness. I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the drops fall, wrapped in the quiet comfort of knowing that for the first time in a long while, I was safe. The legal papers were filed. The conservatorship was dismissed, the restraining order in place. I had a copy tucked neatly in my bottom drawer next to Rex's watch and a stack of old letters. Everything was in order now. The documents, the accounts, the will. But more than that, my heart was in order too. I hadn't heard from Orson since the courthouse. He hadn't called. He hadn't written. And I hadn't reached out either. Some silences are painful. Others are necessary. This one felt like both. Lynette came by that afternoon with lemon muffins from her favorite bakery and a new jigsaw puzzle, a landscape of the Smoky Mountains. We sat at the table in the sunroom, sorting edge pieces and sipping tea, the kind of visit that didn't need words to matter. After she left, I called Edie and told her I was finally ready to join the residence planning committee. "You've been ready," she said. "You just needed time." The weeks passed gently. Spring came early that year, with lilacs blooming before Easter. I spent more time outside, walking the garden path in the mornings, sitting on the bench by the east wing, in the evenings wrapped in my cardigan and the low hum of birdsong. I taught a painting class on Thursdays. Nothing fancy, just light and color and memory. One day, I received a card in the mail. No return address, just a short message in Orson's handwriting. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to undo the damage, but I'm grateful you're okay." I read it once, then folded it back into the envelope and set it in the drawer beside the others. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. Some chapters close without a final sentence. There are things I wish had been different, words I wish he hadn't said, choices I wish he hadn't made. But I no longer carry the weight of wondering what I could have done to stop it. I gave him love. I gave him trust. And when that trust was broken, I gave myself permission to walk away. A woman learns eventually how to stop begging to be treated with dignity and instead to insist on it, quietly, firmly, with grace. I live my life now on my own terms. I open the curtains when I want to. I fill my space with color and books and small good things. I spend time with people who see me as I am not what they want from me. I laugh more. I worry less. I sleep with both eyes closed. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've had a season like mine, a time when you realize that survival isn't just about staying, it's about choosing to leave when something no longer serves your peace. It's about choosing yourself, even when it feels like no one else will. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone, or if you simply want others to know they're not alone, I hope you'll share it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be honored to have you along. Take good care now. You matter more than you know.